Story 1. My daughter was conceived at work, on airport property, in the back of a Ford Focus, while we were waiting for a medical flight to land. She knows nothing about this but tells me she wants to be a pilot when she grows up. Story 2. I'm the child of a parent who hid something horrible until I was 27. One day, when my parents had a domestic dispute, my dad called me just to get back at my mom. He said, "Do you want to know something about your mother? She slept with over 30 guys during our first 2 years of marriage." I just sat down and started stuttering. He said, "You know how people have always said you looked different than the rest of the kids?" I said, "Yeah, that's because I'm not your dad. Your mom slept with my best friend and you were conceived. Another thing, your brother, the one just younger than me, I'm the oldest, belongs to my brother." My mom just bawled in the background without denying it. I just laughed, and then I went into 2 years of therapy. Story 3. That she cannot have a relationship with her grandfather because he is a pedophile and I would never trust him. The rest of my family maintains a relationship with him and urges me strongly to open up communication because family comes first. They are absolutely right. My family does come first, which is why my daughter will never have a relationship with him. He has molested and raped multiple members of my family, and I only found out when I was pregnant with my daughter. Without going into too much detail, he also has a mental illness, and I have been told that I need to let him have a relationship with my daughter because he is sick and could not help it. Story 4. My dad cheated on my mother while she was going through cancer treatments. My mother asked for a divorce and he said to go and take the kids. Every Valentine's Day, I would receive flowers from my dad and get so happy. My mom would smile and nod and get excited with me. I would call him and thank him. He never sent me flowers. It was my mom all those years. The same thing happened with birthday cards and Christmas gifts from him. They were never from him. My mom just put his name on them in similar handwriting. She even went as far as writing return addresses on mail too. My mom was the superhero of a single parent. Story 5. It was a secret until recently my mom told me. When she and my dad got divorced, things were very, very messy, and my dad would do terrible things to dodge paying for my care. He ended up owing my mom a couple $1,000s, and my mom was ready to sue. But instead of getting the lawyers involved, and because she knew my dad was not a healthy person to be in my life, she offered him a deal. Keep the money but relinquish custody officially. I'd still get to see him if and when I wanted, but he would give up all legal rights as a guardian. Because he hated paying my mom that much, he took $2,000 over me. Not a life-changing, earth-shattering secret. It's just revealing to know my dad values money more than me. Before anybody casts judgment on my mom, my dad was and probably is a piece of human garbage who abused me and allowed me to be abused a few years after this, so I'm completely fine with my mom's decision. She's my favorite person in the world, and every single day I am so lucky to have her in my life. Story 6. My father found out when he was in his 40s that his father was not his biological father. His mother, my grandmother, literally cheated on her husband with the milkman. Story 7. Adoptive parent of 3 kids, 2 of whom are biological siblings and cousins. Found out a year after the adoption that the biological parents were half-siblings who shared the same father. The biological parents found out after they had the first child and proceeded to have another. The kids are now 16 and 13, respectively, and have no clue that they are a product of incest. Unfortunately, their biological grandfather just passed away, so there could very well be a big reveal coming in the near future. Story 8. I've been changing every clock in the house on New Year's Eve to 3 hours early. At 9 p.m., we celebrate the new year, then hang out for an hour. He thinks he's breaking every rule and has a great time. Now that he's turning 11, this will never happen again with phones and being somewhat smarter. Story 9. I was the kid in the scenario. When I was like 12, my dad died of leukemia. He was never around much, so I didn't see him often, but that was never a secret. I actually remember the day he took off and left us. I woke up one morning, and there was a pile of new toys on the living room floor with a note from Mom. Anyway, he started coming around when he received the prognosis. We developed something resembling a positive relationship before he died. When he passed, it absolutely destroyed me. I still remember the funeral. I had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, out of the car because I didn't want to see it. In his will, he left me his car, a Camaro that I was supposed to get when I turned 16. His parents fought tooth and nail to keep it from me. They were really awful people, his entire side of the family was, and we eventually just told them to go away and keep the damn thing. Fast forward about 15 years. I found out the guy that died was not actually my dad, he was my brother's dad. My real, biological dad has been living in the next town over 20 minutes from my house, my entire life. My entire family knew about it, except for me. It was why my grandparents fought to keep the car. They knew I was not his son. I still don't know if he knew or not, but I assume so. My maternal grandmother has met him several times in my life. My mom said she never thought it was anything worth digging up. She said she intended for me to never find out. I've still never spoken to him. I know a name and an approximation of where he lives, as of about 10 years ago. Beyond that, I know nothing about the guy. Grandma said if I ever want to meet him, she would help me contact him. I don't know if I ever will. After laying all this out and thinking more about it, there's no possible way the deceased dad did not know I was not his kid. For everyone asking me about the lady asking if I'm her husband. No, I am not married. Story 10. Posting here so when my kids are old enough to snoop, they get a split second of excited expectation before they are greeted by my saying I do really enjoy having sex with their mother. Story 11. I'm hiding a lot of things. I used to be a stripper for 10 years, grew up in an abusive house, partied hard, and was part of the New York City and Montreal club scene. I was even kidnapped and taken to another country. There are a lot of things. Now I'm just a boring accountant mom to everyone. No one has any clue what I've been through. It's crazy what your kids don't know about you. Story 12. I'm the kid. Until I was 12, I thought that I knew my biological dad. That man left when I was around 6, and my mom started dating the man I call and accept as dad. I just thought people left and you moved on. On the way to cheerleading practice when I was 12, my grandma said, "You know Steve isn't your real dad?" I said, "No." And that was it. I found out about 4 years later that my mom was having an affair with my biological dad. One night, she was brutally beaten and raped. She called my biological dad from the hospital, and he said he was on his way. She never heard from him again. I am now 30. She suspects that he arranged the rape. When I was 18, I got a message on Facebook that started off, "You don't know me, but I know you. Don't delete this." It honestly sounded like one of those chain letters. It turned out it was my half-sister from my biological dad. She and I are now Facebook friends but haven't met in person. I have no desire to meet my biological dad. My actual dad, who raised me, is literally amazing. I could not have custom ordered a better father. My mom left him when I was 16 after cheating on him with a woman. He sat me down and told me that just because he and my mom broke up doesn't mean that he and I did. He continued to financially support me and never missed a beat. He met his wife 10 years ago and stepped in as dad to her then 5-year-old. He is so great. Story 13. I am the child. I recently found out about the murder-suicide attempt my great-grandmother tried to commit on her family. Her daughter, my grandmother, survived the attack and some years later moved to Canada as a teen and eventually got married and had my dad. Pretty haunting. Story 14. After reading a bunch of these, I feel pretty good that my most messed up secret is that I eat most of their Halloween, Easter, and parade candy when they are at school. Story 15. I'm the child, 48 years old, but my father told me my mother was dead throughout my childhood, and everyone in the family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and stepmother, supported the lie. Not because my mother was on drugs, abusive, a criminal, or even a bad person. Just because they had a huge argument one night, and she went to stay with a friend without me, so he decided she would never be allowed to be in my life again. Ever. He wrote her off. On my 18th birthday, she called our house and asked to speak with me. So I found out the truth. Story 16. My mom passed 15 years ago. My family had a bunch of stuff that they didn't go through, and that they just kind of left for me. About 10 years ago, when I was trying to downsize and get rid of stuff, I found medical documents that she had kept. Apparently, I was not an only child. She was pregnant with twins. I was the one that made it. Story 17. My son's older half-sister molested him, and that's why we don't see them anymore. We are waiting until we can get into a psychologist for support before we break it to him. He was 3 when it happened, so he was able to tell us quite graphically what was happening. The sister also admitted it and said she did it because it was funny and she liked to hurt him. Child Protective Services became involved and investigated both families, but couldn't find anything suspicious. We are telling him because we strongly believe it is the right thing to do. We don't know what or how much he remembers and would prefer to give him the coping skills now instead of possibly letting him disintegrate into a non-functioning adult with massive problems. Thank you so much for all the support. It is a horrible thing to deal with, but we are going to do everything in our power to love and support him. I am so sorry that so many of you had to go through similar situations. I am proud of every one of you for surviving and fighting. Story 18. A colleague of mine has a friend who hid from her 8-year-old daughter that she, the 8-year-old, would die within a few years because of a terminal illness she got. Story 19. The reason we do not talk to Uncle Jimmy is because he molested 8 students while he was a teacher for 20 years, went to jail, and is now treated as if he is a leper in our city. Story 20. My wife and I each have a child from a previous marriage. Both of our ex-spouses were abusive cheaters. Both children still adore and idolize their other parent, and we just keep smiling and nodding. This probably is not the type of thing the original poster was asking, but it is a secret that we will maintain for years. Thank you everyone for the replies and commiserative stories. It makes us feel better that we are not the only ones keeping things like this a secret. Story 21. Before I found out I was pregnant with my first child, I took a lot of pills. I think it's the closest I've ever come to suicide. I had always dealt with anxiety and depression. I feel like the extra hormones put me over the edge. I found out about a week later that I was pregnant. I was terrified the entire pregnancy that something would be wrong with him. Luckily, he was completely healthy and is an incredibly smart child. I've never told anyone. I feel so guilty. Story 22. My wife is not the biological mother of our twins. We did in vitro fertilization, and their biological mother was an egg donor from a country in South America. My wife carried them and gave birth to them, but has no biological connection. We'll tell them someday when they're older. It's a little bit strange, but one looks exactly like me at that age, and the other one looks very much like my brother. I can't believe that this blew up so big. My highest rated comment is about a family secret. Thanks to everyone for all the great advice about letting the cat out of the bag to our twins. Comments from people in this situation were especially helpful. Comments about the biological aspects were very helpful and educational. For anyone wondering, our twins are 8.5 years old, and my side of the family has known the truth from a time long before the procedure occurred. For whatever reason, my wife decided to tell her family that she was the egg donor, I the sperm donor, and that we did in vitro fertilization because we were older and needed medical help to get her pregnant. I never understood why, but went along with it because it was what she wanted. I will broach the subject when my wife gets back in the country from a long work trip. Thanks again to the people of Reddit for helping to open my eyes about the impact of waiting too long to tell our kids the truth. Story 23. Not a parent but a child. This last Christmas, I found out that not only had my mom been previously married and divorced, but my dad had a child before he married my mom. So I have a half-brother or sister that I have never met. The real surprise was that I found out from my new sister-in-law, who had someone do some digging, discovered this information, assumed that I must already know, and brought it up out of the blue on Christmas Eve while we were baking cookies. Story 24. My daughter knows that her grandparents are getting a divorce. She doesn't know that it's because Grandpa, age 72, decided to have a child with a 23-year-old. We will talk about it once she's older, but I don't want to normalize that relationship for a pre-adolescent. This is my father-in-law. He's definitely not rich, in fairly impressive shape for a man receiving Social Security, and I am happily ignorant as to the status of his erections. It's a small-town story with a troubled single mom and an old man who hasn't experienced much emotional growth since being drafted for service in Vietnam. These people would never end up together if they were emotionally healthy and didn't have control issues. I am definitely going to do my best to explain to my daughter, but she's 9 and emotionally overwhelmed by the idea of the divorce. When she comes to me to talk about it, having processed the idea, then I will explain the situation more fully. My husband has already told his dad that our family and his new family won't be getting together for a barbecue anytime in the foreseeable future. A lot of you are assuming a lot about the 23-year-old. I would remind you that we are talking about a small town, single mom with daddy issues in the rural deep south. You're a bunch of optimists.